This is that SentinelCast, number 81. I'm Sam Sachs.
I'm Sam Knight. What's up, Pisstown pals?
We are in the Sentinel Fort in Washington, D.C., broadcasting on Friday, which is why this is the SentinelCast and not District Sentinel Radio, despite the same aesthetics and music. It's on Friday, it's the SentinelCast. If it's Monday through Thursday, it's District Sentinel Radio. Glad we have that all worked out.
Now that that's been cleared up, coming
Yes.
up on today's show, how can American unions reclaim their relevance? Possibly by emulating their Canadian siblings and taking direct action. Peter Knowlton, General President of UE, joins us to discuss.
And a story about one independent rock station resisting corporate consolidation. We talked to friend of the show, TV producer Kurt Gardinier.
All that, but first, some news on this Friday in light of Guilty or Innocent.
In lieu of Guilty or Innocent,
Or in lieu, or despite, or whatever.
How about this? Let's settle this right now. All the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, guilty. Guilty.
Yes, court is in session. It's now closed. We decided to skip Guilty or Innocent because, as I'm sure you're aware, there was some drama Thursday. They had a vote on the Kavanaugh nomination. Usually nomination votes are on Thursday, but because Thursday there was the testimony from Dr. Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, if you can call what Kavanaugh did testimony, we had the vote today, and there was some late drama.
Yeah, it looked for a while like Democrats were not going to give Chuck Grassley quorum to hold the vote. All the Democrats left the committee, and we learned that a lot of them were talking to Jeff Flake, who Jeff Flake this morning came out and said he would support Kavanaugh. One day after, Flake admitted after Kavanaugh's testimony that there's still lingering doubts over whether this guy is a serial sexual abuser.
And then there was a moment there that was captured on TV, which may give us some insight into why Flake changed his mind.
Well, Flake was yelled at in an elevator by sexual assault survivors.
Yes. And I think at one point she was yelling, "Look me in the face," and "Look me in the eye." And
he wouldn't, because he's a fucking coward.
He's a coward.
Anyways, despite having doubts admitted to yesterday, Flake said he'd vote for Kavanaugh.
I think there may have been another moment during the opening statements when Senator Sheldon Whitehouse blew up a day on Brett Kavanaugh's calendar, which seemed to match the description of the party that Dr. Ford described, of the gathering that Dr. Ford described.
Yeah, that was kind of compelling right there. I mean, Kavanaugh's own calendar might be the best evidence for Dr. Ford here in that case. But Flake came in. A vote was scheduled for 1:30. Democrats were obviously not upset. Booker stormed out. Kamala Harris stormed out. And eventually all the Democrats left the committee room in order to conduct official business, like pass bills out of committee, vote on nominees, pass nominees out of committee. You need a quorum in the Senate Judiciary Committee. You need at least 2 members of the minority present for that to happen. So if the Democrats just left the room, as they did, then Grassley wouldn't have been able to bring up Kavanaugh for a vote out of committee. And it doesn't matter if Kavanaugh doesn't get out of committee, he can still be brought to the floor. It would have been, mostly symbolic having Kavanaugh defeated in committee, or at least not reported out of committee. But Democrats struck some deal with Jeff Flake where they would all come back in the committee, give quorum to allow a vote on Kavanaugh to be taken, and then Kavanaugh reported out of committee, as long as Jeff Flake made this promise that he would want some FBI investigation before a final vote on the Senate floor. But in the meantime, Flake's going to vote yes on Kavanaugh in committee and help make sure that the committee passes Kavanaugh's nomination. So Democrats got rolled again, in my opinion. They could have at least protested, stopped Grassley from holding this vote, But they gave in out of some vague promise that an FBI investigation is going to be held. And also, who knows? I mean, we don't know how thorough this FBI investigation is going to be. We don't know if Mark Judge is just going to lie and they're going to stop it at that. So this might all give cover to people like Jeff Flake. If some tertiary investigation is conducted, then Flake can come in a week and say, hey, we got the investigation, vote yes. And I think that others like Joe Manchin and Susan Collins and Murkowski, who've all kind of come out forward and said that they stand with Flake on this idea, it gives them all cover to vote yes.
I think where the Democrats erred strategically, glaringly, is that they needed to keep one person in the committee, because had there been no Democrats in the committee, Grassley could have suspended the rules by unanimous consent.
Yeah.
However, you need 2 members of the minority for quorum. Feinstein or Leahy, it makes sense for Feinstein because she's the ranking member. She could have stayed in there.
Yeah.
While this was all going out.
Stayed there just to block
a vote. All the other Democrats could have forced Flake to agree to specific language on a motion.
Yeah.
Before restoring quorum. Now, this is where it gets to even a bigger amateur hour. The 2 hour rule could have been invoked at 2:00 when the Senate gavelled into session. And Grassley evidently was very aware of this because he rushed the vote, and as soon as it was 2:00, he invoked the 2 hour rule, and the committee had to adjourn. So had they even kept Flake out there in the antechamber, hemming and hawing and clawing at his own shirt, had they just kept him there till 2, they could have been like, well, now it's time to shut down the committee, and we're still where we are right now. But now there's more time. And
yeah,
I don't know. I am a little less cynical, I think, than you. I don't think the FBI investigation necessarily gets them to yes, but it sure as hell keeps them from making a decision. And they clearly don't want to make a decision. The 4 senators who at this moment are left undecided. We have Heitkamp, Collins, Murkowski, and Manchin. The balance of power, Kavanaugh's fate, Supreme Court is in their hands.
Yeah, for the next week.
And they clearly are not psyched about having to vote one way or the other. And I think if they hem and haw, it increases the chances of maybe Kavanaugh withdrawing his own nomination. Maybe
increases time for more people to come forward with allegations too.
More time for more people.
I'm convinced this guy's
Kaczynski.
serial.
We're waiting for Kaczynski.
Yeah, and the Kaczynski stuff to come out.
And there was one more thing, but I think we've probably covered our bases here.
Yeah. So I guess we'll be reporting on this all next week as well.
Yeah, the zine.
The zine.
The zine is coming out Monday because I don't think either of us anticipated how erratic Brett Kavanaugh would be in his testimony.
Yeah, we've watched
yesterday.
a lot of Senate Judiciary Committee the last 2 days and haven't had much chance to get the zine straight. But we're going to work on that this weekend and have that released to all of you subscribers on Patreon by Monday.
Do you think Mark Judge right now is in a car headed to Canada? fleeing the country?
I think if I was Mark Judge, I'd feel pretty protected by Republican senators and think that nothing's going to happen to me. TBH. All right. Should we move on to the interviews for this week, Sam?
Let's do it. It's no secret American unions have neglected radical tactics for years, even as they have become increasingly irrelevant. One union, however, is hoping to change that, and it's looking to our neighbors to the north for inspiration. Joining us to discuss is Peter Knowlton, the general president of that union, United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, otherwise known as UE. Knowlton joined us yesterday morning.
Peter, we brought you on to briefly talk about some labor actions going on in Canada that could be emulated here in the United States. But first, for our audience who are unaware of UE, the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, tell us a little bit about your union and how it might differ from other unions like the AFL-CIO and bigger unions.
So, sure. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
The union was founded in 1930. Oh, no problem. Anytime. The union was founded in 1936, made up of basically 7 independent unions that were in General Electric, Westinghouse, Sylvania, RCA, Phillips, and later the machine tool industry. But they came together in 1936 to form a national independent union to organize the radio, electrical, and machine industries in the United States. And has been an independent union ever since then. It was one of the founding unions of the CIO back in 1937 when the CIO was founded, and continued in the CIO up until the late 40s when we left during Taft-Hartley and the McCarthy era and the red baiting and the attack on 11 of the most progressive independent unions in the country by the federal government, the largest corporations in America, the Catholic Church, and AFL and CIO, both at the time. So we've remained independent ever since the late 40s. And when we mean independent, we mean we are not beholden to, nor subject of, any political party in the United States. And we carry our own tune, and we do historically what some would call strategic voting, which is on an electoral level. We work with candidates that support and share our values. And that's on the independent level. On the political action level, our political action is involved. Obviously, many of our members vote, like all other too. We work for candidates who support us. But most of our political action work is on issue-oriented, both within the workplace but outside of the workplace in the community. So we've been working for many decades on Medicare for All. We're historically a very progressive union. We were the first national union to come out against the Vietnam War, supported the civil rights movement early on, probably pretty much since the founding of the union, have made groundbreaking work within General Electric and Westinghouse historically for equal pay for equal work, for anti-discrimination measures. We have a national agreement with General Electric. We are seen by the labor movement as one of the more militant, democratic, member-run organizations in the country.
I gotta say, it's always refreshing to hear the UE history, thinking about things like the AFL-CIO endorsing Obama in 2012, which of course they would do, but like straight away without extracting any sort of concessions or promises from him.
But we got card check.
No, we did not get card check. And also seeing things like I recall recently the head of AFT, Randy Weingarten, tweeting something about how the U.S. must get involved in like the Syrian civil war, and thinking, God, like some of our union leadership, like obviously when the right wing criticizes American unions, it's all full of crap. But some of the union leadership in the U.S. and the union's ideological tilt is really just embarrassing. You don't have to comment on that.
Yeah, it's been that way. No, I don't mind commenting on it. I mean, it's, I don't disagree with your description in many respects, and it's one of the reasons why we maintain an independent union, not part of the AFL-CIO. It's very disheartening when labor leaders really sort of begin to carry the water of the employer and start talking about issues that really are issues more concerning to an employer than they are to the labor movement. Or they're afraid because they think it's out of reach, so therefore they're not even going to work on the issue. Probably Medicare for All single payer is probably the single biggest issue one could identify with in terms of where the labor movement really has not stepped out in terms of really pushing that issue headlong despite employer resistance. And the employee resistance is not one of a financial nature. It's ideological, because they believe the free market ought to control our healthcare needs, which we don't in our union, never have. We consider it a right. I've always worked on that issue on that level. But there are many labor leaders around who are just willing to accept whatever crumbs are thrown at the table and not push for more for working people. I think in large measure that's why we're kind of in the trouble we're in the labor movement. We're down to 6% in the private sector and less than 12% overall. It's why one of the reasons why Janus got passed, one of the reasons why Trump got elected. It's one of the reasons why we have NAFTA. I mean, there has not been a significant piece of labor legislation passed since the 1970s, since OSHA. Some might say the Family Medical Leave Act of 12 weeks of unpaid time was significant. It was a nice improvement. OSHA was very significant, but that was in large measure done as a result of the work of Ralph Nader in conjunction with the AFL-CIO, not just the AFL-CIO itself, and passed under a Republican administration. We should remind ourselves. And it's interesting because Nixon back in the 70s, frankly, would be a Democrat today in terms of policies, and maybe to the left within the party.
He tried to pass Obamacare.
Many of the things that he did. Yeah, no, absolutely. He did. And under Eisenhower, a Republican administration, you look at the Republican Party platform in 1956, it is to the left of the Democratic Party today. And we had a 90% marginal tax rate under Dwight D. Eisenhower for the wealthiest of Americans, under Eisenhower. So there is, and for us, that's a direct result of labor's complete capitulation to the business community and to corporations on those broader economic issues over the last 70 years. That is changing in fairly measurable ways, which is very encouraging.
Well, we're seeing,
so go ahead.
We're seeing some less capitulation in our neighbor up north with a Canadian union, Unifor, where workers had been locked out. They've now locked their bosses out of a plant up there, and UE has released a press release which caught my eye this week, highlighting what's going on in Canada and saying this is why we need more union militancy here in the United States.
So, I think it goes without saying that workers are attracted to other workers standing up and fighting for their rights. And in the U.S., we are incredibly timid in standing up for our rights, except when things really come to a head. And in some respects, that is oftentimes too late to solve a particular problem. So what is happening up in Gander in Labrador at a place called DJ Composites, where there's 30 people who have been locked out for 647 days today, I believe, is an example of kind of how things in the Canadian labor movement operate a little bit differently. That local is still incredibly strong. A company based out of Auburn, Kansas, is trying to destroy the lives of 30 families in Gander. They make it's a composite factory, a lot of handwork. They do stuff mostly for the aviation industry, both military and recreational, as I understand it. And the workers have very minimal demands on the company, and the company locked them out almost 2 years ago now, and has been putting pressure on those families ever since. So Unifor is now is upping the ante on the company, has locked out the bosses and the scabs, and they've been considerable scabs that over the last month, Unifor has been doing a publicity campaign around who the scabs are, putting their names up on Facebook pages, doing videos about them. And so Unifor is really sort of upping the ante in this particular struggle and taking it to a level it has not been before. So there's hundreds of people blockading the plant as we speak. That will continue indefinitely until the company decides to come to the table and negotiate a fair agreement, of which Unifor has actually offered to them just taking it to binding arbitration. And the company has thus far refused on that. But we've seen these kind of employer actions before. It is nothing new. It's nothing that anybody should really not expect with some of these really recalcitrant, just very right-wing employers. And so the issue really is, how are we going to react to it as trade unionists, as trade union leaders, and as union members? And the Unifor approach, and in many respects, it is somewhat of a Canadian approach, although not exclusively, comes from that history of them being their members coming out of the Canadian Auto Workers and the Communications, Energy, and Paper Workers. The CAW historically has occupied facilities when there's attempted closures, have blockaded plants, have waged long strikes, long struggles. It's always been a part of its toolkit that its members have utilized. And they don't have any problems with it. I mean, it's extra legal actions, but the reality is when you're right up against it and you have an employer trying to steal your job or trying to diminish the standard of living in an area completely unjustifiably, from our perspective, workers have the right to be as creative as they possibly can be to bring that employer back to the table. And if that means blockading a plant, occupying a plant, going out on strike, doing whatever is necessary in a mass nonviolent way, we've always thought in our union that workers ought to employ those particular tactics. And over the last summer, Unifor did employ blockades at two different facilities, one at one of the world's largest underground salt mines outside of Toronto, and another one way up on Thunder Bay at a healthcare facility of 65 women at a place called Port Arthur, where they had strikes and lockouts, and they went on for a good period of time, and then finally Unifor coalesced its forces and blockaded the salt mine in a place called Goodrich, or Goodrich, I guess is how you say it. And then in Port Arthur, they put a 200-foot fence and surrounded the healthcare facility and chained the fence locked. And, it sets in things, a whole bunch of things in motions with, injunctions being put forward by the employer to the courts. And it takes it to a whole nother level. And it is, these are the tactics that have historically been the bread and butter of the trade union movement. But you look at the number of strikes that have occurred in our country in the last 10 years, and it's abysmal. And it's not because the employers are not trying to rip our hearts out and destroy our incomes and destroy our families. They continue to do that. But in large measure, from our perspective, it's because the trade union movement has, in some measures, we've lost our way. And where I think we're way too timid in taking on the employer.
To be fair,
all you have to do is just look how much. Go ahead.
We do have the giant inflatable rat, so.
Yes, we do. Yep, no, we do. That's an incredibly chilling.
Please,
deterrent.
Scabby. Scabby has a name.
Doing what they do.
Scabby has a name. Please.
It does. I mean, it's a nice symbol, but when that becomes your last resort, it's like, wow, we really got a long way. Yeah. We really need to relearn a lot of the lessons that our ancestors taught us, frankly.
So,
and but I think things are starting to change. What happened with the teachers in West Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma is absolutely inspiring, right? Which began by the Chicago Teachers Union in Chicago a few years back.
Yeah.
So there is that consciousness coming back into the labor movement. You can see measurable changes in our labor movement in the U.S. over the last few years. We like to think a lot of it began changing in 2008 when one of our locals occupied a factory called Republic Windows and Doors in Chicago. That for us is kind of when some of the beginnings of the change happened. And that lasted for a week with the local there occupying that facility, demanding severance payments, which they were ultimately victorious on, right? And then Occupy Wall Street happened 3 years later, which the labor movement got very involved in. But then that went away. But there does seem to be sort of, most workers, frankly, they want to see their labor movement active and not afraid of the employer and being smart and strategic and taking them on when they need to be. So that's our experience.
I wanted to bring up issues south of the border, but before we do, I would note I was just looking up the private sector unionization rate in Canada, and right now it's 15%, which is probably not great, not ideal, but still 3 times higher than what it is in the U.S. So if we're going to extrapolate things and say, well, I guess there's just a data point worth more exploring about how militancy might attract more people to the union, to the movement. But I just wanted to ask. I mean, it doesn't sound like you're saying this. You definitely are saying this, which is that unions should not be playing by the rules of the National Labor Relations Act, and you touched on that when you said that Taft-Hartley was the reason why UE split from AFL-CIO. I was wondering if you could explain what you think is wrong with the NLRA, sort of, briefly. I'm sure you could go on for hours and hours, but if you could briefly explain what's wrong with the NLRA and what unions should be doing, attacking specific parts of it, other than just generally being more militant.
So really, there's a basic construct of the NLRA. When the NLRA was passed, it was first the National Recovery Act. It was the initial beginnings of it, right? And there was large debates within Congress and the administration, the labor movement at that time, about what it should be based on.
This is 1936, right?
Was a part of. This is early in This is early in the late 30s. So the basic construct that ended up being taking the rule of the day was that the National Labor Relations Act would essentially, labor law would be based on the Commerce Clause of the United States, as opposed to the Constitution. In particular, the first 13th Amendment, we can say the 14th Amendment, but in particular, right, those parts of the Constitution that basically give us our inalienable rights in many respects. And the issue was we should have those not only in our houses and in the streets, but we should have those rights in the workplace. For anybody who's familiar at all with labor law or tried to organize a workplace, we know that when we go to work, when we walk through that door, we lose all sorts of First Amendment rights that we thought we had when we were out on the street or in our own homes. So, for instance, you don't necessarily have the right to speak freely, to assemble, to engage in certain things by yourself. If you do it with another person, if you do it collectively, you gain some of those constitutional rights, but not exclusively and not completely. So with that construct of our labor law being based on a Commerce Clause, as opposed to instead of the Constitution, creates huge hurdles for the labor movement in terms of how it's able to operate and espouse and what it's able to do. So that's first thing. And then secondly, based out of that, and I'll end this really quick, based out of that, it's basically the whole construct of the National Labor Relations Act, how you organize a union, how you get certification, how you aren't able to get first contracts, what the employer can and cannot get away with during organizing drive. Right, is completely inefficient and ineffective for workers. And for us to just sort of go by all of the rules that the board puts before us and not try to organize, for instance, which you are able to do outside of the board rules, is for us a mistake. And there's been lots of unions who've been looking at organizing in particular, but also how to settle for a contract outside of the board. Out of the confines of the board law. And it's not that you're doing it illegally, you're just sort of doing it extra legally.
Well, and
that's the kind of stuff that needs to be looked at more.
I know that a lot of employers don't have a lot to fear from breaking the NLRA. Sometimes they will probably deliberately break the law, and then the only remedy is you have to put up a sign saying you won't break the law in your own employee break room or something. But do employees, do workers and unions have a lot to fear from breaking the law? I mean, I know there's a history of holding labor leaders in contempt of court for violating injunctions and being thrown in jail. What do you think? What do you make of the cost of that? That's it. I mean, could that just be the cost of doing business?
I do think, number one, I don't think it should just be the cost of business. I think employers ought to go to jail, like we do, when we strongly break the law. But very more often than not, I mean, you just look at the violations around health and safety. Yeah. People who've been killed, people who have been workers who've been murdered, who've been poisoned, whole communities have been poisoned. Employers don't go. Look at the financial crisis in 2008. I mean, employers, they don't go they don't go to jail for breaking the law for the most part. Yeah. But working people and trade unions do on a regular basis. I mean, Ron Carey, the former president of the Teamsters, who was accused of money finaglings and was thrown out of office. The government took him out of his office, and he was barred from ever running from office again, even though he was acquitted of all charges. He got acquitted of all charges, but then could never run for office again. During Ron Carey's tenure, there was a nationwide strike at UPS. That was a groundbreaking strike, if people remember, around, did we want part-time America? part-time America, and it was around UPS is just trying to force gazillions of more part-time jobs onto those really good full-time jobs that Teamster drivers and warehouse people have enjoyed for decades. And there was a national strike, very successful national strike. And they had to figure out a way to get him. And that's kind of how they got him. But it was all a setup. It was all based on this, that, and maybes. And he was eventually acquitted, killed him to an early death. He died a number of years ago. But was one of the foremost, most militant trade union leaders this country has seen in a long, long time. And that's how they were able to, to destroy him in that movement. That kind of stuff happens on a regular basis. They tried to do it with us back in the 40s and 50s. We didn't allow it. So following, agreeing to injunctions, a trade union has to look at very strongly. But when workers go out on strike, you don't expect that there's injunctions that are going to be thrown at you. And it's sort of our general rule of thumb that if you immediately just go to observing the injunction, you've probably lost that particular struggle. And there are times where you just have to make an extra legal challenge. The civil rights movement was based on breaking the law because the law was unjust. There is a particular part of Taft-Hartley called Section 4B, which is the secondary boycott. And that's the one where if you're on strike at a particular facility, you cannot strike a customer or a supplier. It's called a secondary boycott. That ought to be illegal. That clause is there because our labor law is based on the Commerce Clause, not based on the Constitution. Corporations are considered persons for the purposes of the First Amendment to the Constitution, but clearly trade unions aren't. There's a completely different construct for us. And that construct has got to change, I think, in order for us to really take our trade unions to take their rightful place in society. And you can just, you can look at the destruction of the trade union movement over the last, number of decades, and you just look at the destruction in the standard of living in this country. It's a parallel graph downward.
Peter,
and without strong trade unions, go ahead.
Finally, other than the outside forces in the law, do you think that a lot of this has to do with the way unions are organized in the U.S. too? Very top-down approach where you have union bosses who are close with business leaders and close with powerful politicians, and therefore they're not likely to engage in actions that will really ruffle some feathers. Do you find that a union like UE, which is more rank and file, has more freedom to engage in more militant actions?
Yes, I do. And I think the labor movement got away from engaging in more militant actions decades ago. We basically have a saying in our own union, which is we're more concerned about maintaining credibility with the workers and our members than we do the employer. But I think it's the many trade union leaders' obsession with maintaining credibility with the boss as opposed to their members that have gotten us into some real pickles. And have created a labor movement that really does not speak for unorganized workers. I do think it's fair to say that to a large degree, the labor movement, the quote-unquote official labor movement in the U.S. has lost touch with unorganized workers in the United States. Now, that being said, there's all sorts of efforts to try to reverse that and has had some measure of success over the last number of years. But still, by and large, there are people that are more interested in being labor statesmen than they are being labor organizers.
Mm-hmm. Peter Knowlton, president of the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America. Where can people find more information about the union?
So the best place to go is you can go to our website, which is www.ueunion, that's ueunion.org. You can do UE Union on Facebook or on our Twitter account as well. And people can contact us through the website or the Facebook page or Twitter any way you'd like to, and we'd be glad to continue a dialogue with folks.
Great. Peter, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was very nice being on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.
And we're back live to Sam, still here in Washington, D.C. Thanks again to Peter Knowlton for that interview. And we're going to keep on moving here to another interview. It's been pretty damn dark times this week. I honestly have felt worse this week than when Trump was elected.
Yeah.
Like, we talked about this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, with Trump, there was I didn't think he was going to actually win, but I also wasn't that surprised when he won.
Right. And that involved our broken electoral system.
Yeah.
This could be put to a stop very quickly. And we all expect Republicans to do this. Nevertheless, to see it happen in real time is pretty awful.
Anyways, to lighten things up, earlier this week we sat down with a friend, patron of the show, Kurt Gardinier. He's a producer for CGTN's Full Frame, and he has a new report out about a plucky independent radio station that's been resisting corporate takeover for decades. Okay, we are here, 3 dudes in the Sentinel Fort for the first time for live recording. We've had 4 people in the Sentinel Fort before, but never recording with more than 2. Welcome, Kurt Gardinier, producer of Full Frame on CGTN, which is China State Television. Right, Kurt?
Yeah.
But it's good. It's good content. You've got a new report out.
Just to be clear, because you fucked up the intro.
What did I do?
This is the first time we have more than 2 people on the live stream, the live video stream.
Oh, what did I say?
I don't even remember.
I thought I said on video.
I
don't think you said video.
I think you just whatever it was, you fucked it up.
Who keeps
Fair
the
enough.
stats on this?
Fair enough.
We do. This is. You should be honored that you are our first live video guest.
I haven't been allowed to say anything yet.
Well, we're gonna let you say
Shut
plenty
up.
here in just a second. We got you on to talk basically about media consolidation.
Yeah.
Right?
Radio specifically.
Yeah, when we're talking about radio. What did you learn?
I learned, and I used to work in radio many years ago. I learned from this report that the station that we profiled, WEQX 1027, The Real Alternative, they usually just go by EQX, that they're extremely rare, they're independent, and they're awesome, and that's an extremely rare thing in the radio industry throughout this country right now.
So I gather from the W that the radio station is east of the Mississippi River.
That is correct. It would be K if it was west of the Mississippi River.
Right. My point is, where's the...
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
Oh, come on, Sam.
Jesus. My point is, where's the radio station?
You want to know the location?
Yes.
Okay, it is in the Albany market, but it is stationed Albany, New York. There's Albany, Georgia, Albany, New York, which is the upstate New York, which is where I'm from. And it's their station is located in Manchester, Vermont, the Green Mountains of Vermont. It's
so
beautiful. Bernie country. Actually.
Did you listen to this radio station growing up?
I've been listening to this radio station since 7th grade.
Since 7th grade.
Yes, and I still listen.
What
to
was
it
that?
now.
Like 60 years ago?
Yeah, I'm the oldest one here, I guess. And I
By
still,
far.
Yeah. And I still listen to it via my Sonos speakers at home. And if you travel or you listen to radio in the DC market, I mean, there's nothing like it. It's stationed like no other, and people love it up there, and that's the reason why they're continuously voted the best station in the Albany market, despite the fact that 1, they're in Vermont, and 2, they're not owned by one of the big guys, Clear Channel, Cumulus, one of the big corporations, which control most everything in the radio industry.
And I think we have a clip, right?
We do have a clip. We have a clip of...
This is from your report.
It's from my report. It's called Full Frame Close-Up Elevated Independence. And I give a little tap hit. No, tap hit? What is it? Tip hat?
Hat tip.
Hat tip. Yeah, to my boss, Mana. We were struggling with the title of it, but we're happy with we did it together. We're happy with it. Elevated Independence. The clip is of Jeff. He's the program director at WEQX. He's been there for about 10 years. He talks about the difference between corporate radio stations and independent radio stations like EQX.
A big problem with large corporations owning hundreds and hundreds of radio stations is there's no competition. Competition breeds creativity and makes you strive to be better. I think there are markets where a corporation owns every single radio station in that market, and so what is the incentive to do better?
radio stations were gobbled up by these bigger corporations. And interestingly enough, now we start seeing more of this syndication top-down again, where companies like iHeartMedia originate programming out of centralized locations, and then their local market affiliates distribute those programs. So it's much less locally oriented nowadays than it was 20 years ago, even 10 years ago.
So, Kurt, I know that what drew you to this story is because you like some of the lamest rock music out there. You and I have always clashed over music, and I don't even listen to fucking music. But, like, there is a political message at work here. I mean, did you sense that at the radio station? I know the guys talk about the freedom they have when they don't have to go through the hierarchies and bosses about putting things on air, but do they feel themselves that they're embarking on sort of a political project by having this independent radio station in the face of all these corporate-owned ones?
I think so, yeah. And it's more just kind of like an FU to the big corporations, you know, like they're continuously ranked the top station in the country, or in the market, which I said they've been voted one of the top stations of the country by Rolling Stone. And I think they just take a lot of pride in it, that the fact that they're independent. They've been independent since they started in 1983. And you know, considering the radio climate, it's fascinating that they're doing it. And can I throw some stats at you? Throw them. Yes. Prior to 1996, there was a cap on the number of radio stations corporations could own. That was 40. Then in 1996, Congress passed the Telecommunications Act, signed by Bill Clinton, and that lifted that cap. And between then and now, Clear Channel, which is now iHeartMedia, at one point owned 1,200 radio stations in the country. Part of that, they couldn't own more than 40. So basically, in 1996, that changed the radio industry entirely, and that just proves, and just kind of, it's another, you know, accolade to EQX, how that they remained independent all this time. And there's a part in the piece where they easily could have sold the station because they kept having these corporations come and trying to grab it, and they refuse. And being independent is very important to them, obviously.
Hope they're not small business tyrants.
The station is run probably...
Are they unionized?
They are not. There's probably three people. There's probably three main people that run the station. Mimi Brown, who's the owner, Jeff Morad, don't read my notes, the program director, and Jason Keller, who's the afternoon drive time host and the music director, I believe. Those, like, basically the station's run by three people. Obviously, there's other DJs and other people involved, but those are the three key people. And Jeff makes a point of it in the piece that, you know, the reason why they can remain independent is because they're not paying, you know, CEOs, you know, six figures that own 2 or 3 houses. You know, they don't have that big salaries that most of these corporations have. Yeah,
staying too small to fail in a way. And it shows that doing the right thing can succeed. It seems like this station's doing pretty well. There was a part where Weezer came and played at the station.
We agree on Weezer.
Yeah, I used to be a Weezer fan.
What year?
Their older stuff.
What year did Weezer? Are we talking new
Recent,
Weezer?
Yeah, this was new Weezer.
Weezer. Well, okay. No, this was the hip hip song. The hip hip.
Wait, did they go when the Green? That was from the Green album, wasn't it? Or
yeah, it sounds right.
But did they go back then? I thought this was recent.
This was recent.
Yeah,
Weezer.
Don't try to pull this.
No,
there in the
Weezer they have a segment called EQX House Sessions, and bands come in. I think 35 bands have gone through, and it's kind of out of the way. It's not near Albany. It's like a 30-40 minute drive from Albany. And Weezer came. They've had Portugal the Man, and Weezer played a song, and that's kind of how the piece ends. And Rivers Cuomo kind of gives a little shout out to EQX at the end in his hip hip song, which I don't know the name of it, but hip hip. You know what it is?
I believe it's Island in the Sun.
All right, nice job.
Yeah.
So the music they play is fantastic. For one, I know you don't particularly like it. I think Sam might. It's true alternative rock. I mean, they don't look at the charts. They don't look at what I'll hear songs that they've played 6 months ago, and then I'll throw on DC 101, which is a terrible radio station owned by iHeart in the DC market where we live, and they'll just start playing it because they don't like the clip you play. They can't just make decisions really quickly. So the songs you hear, there's nothing really unique about it, and the playlists for the most part are, you know, decided on at their corporate headquarters in LA and New York. So the station in Texas, they're really not deciding what the music they play. The executives in LA and New York are, and EQX, they're deciding it. No one else is. That's a big difference.
Well, as a lifelong resident of the Washington area, I can confirm that DC 101 has been playing basically the same top 40 songs that they have been playing since the 90s, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Since about the Telecommunications Act of 1996. That sounds about like the last time that DC 101 updated its disc jockey.
I think that's right. They still have that guy in the morning who's awful. Elliot
in the morning.
I think he's been on for like 30 years.
It's not funny. I mean, it's bad. It's bad talk radio.
It's bad.
And every now and again, I will be driving a car in the Washington area at that time, and I'm like, you know what? I need to get me going right now is some high tempo rock music. Because it's the morning, you're trying to get the blood flowing.
Yeah.
And I go to DC 101, and Elliot is there talking about some stupid fucking thing he read on the internet.
It's a terrible.
Who gives a shit?
It's a terrible radio station, and they call themselves
awful radio station.
They call themselves alternative. Like they have a promo like we're alternative rock, and then they play like clips of like the Foo Fighters. And like, there's nothing alternative about the Foo Fighters. Like, there's just not. Like, they're one of the most mainstream rock bands in the country.
No, but to be clear, Weezer in 2018, 2017.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe you could have led with a stronger foot.
True. Also in the piece are bands like Fantagram, who are from the EQX area. They're from Greenwich, New York. You might not have heard of them. Your roommate Coop has, because they collaborated. Another Sam. They collaborated with this rapper Big Boy. So some people know Fantagram.
From Outkast?
Big Boy from Outkast?
Maybe.
I know that.
Is he from Outkast?
How do you not know that?
Because I don't like that type of music. I like EQX music. So yeah, so Fantagram. We went to me and my photographer Eric Courtney, who's fantastic. We went to Albuquerque, interviewed Fantagram, shot their show. It was fantastic. We shot a show from Middle Kids at the Albany Distilling Company in Albany, New York. They're an Australian band. And then we also shot a band called Company of Thieves. They didn't end up making it into the cut. But we were around some really good bands, alternative rock bands that aren't Weezer.
Well, Kurt, thank you for your service.
That's it? This is over?
Yeah. Any final thoughts here that you want to leave us with about the station?
I would like to give a shout out. I mentioned Mana, my boss, Eric, the photographer, but Kamran, I can't pronounce his last name. It's too long. He's Iranian. He's awesome. He was the editor, and if you watch it, you can see how awesome he is. To see it, you can go to cgtnamerica.com, click on the full frame tab, and then find the piece titled Full Frame Close-Up, Elevated Independence.
There it is. Kurt Gardinier, where can people...
One question.
Yeah.
One question for you guys, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
How long have you been planning this question?
Just today.
Okay.
It's on my notes. So I noticed...
It's a blank piece of paper.
I noticed when
That's why you didn't want me to read your notes.
I noticed when you started the live stream, you started streaming it live at 4 p.m. And then someone switched it to 4:20 p.m., which I think is a great idea. And I was just wondering who came up with that idea.
Well, when we got the 3-camera shot and started doing graphics, we needed a little more time to prepare the show. So we thought about doing it later, but the listeners and viewers liked it earlier. So we kept it, but we kind of compromised at 4:20, and people seem to enjoy that time.
What is your
well.
answer to that question?
That's
accurate.
That's accurate. Yeah,
it is not accurate. You're looking at the person who suggested moving it to 4:20.
Well, that was already in our head before you suggested it. You might have confirmed it.
Even on the air, you gave me credit how quickly you forget that I'm the one who came up with it.
Well,
maybe I did forget.
Let's do a show every day.
Maybe I did forget. Kurt Gardinier.
We can't remember them.
Yeah,
we can't remember all of them.
A loyal patron.
That's true.
On our Patreon.
Yes, and pay money to these guys. Patreon.com/District Sentinel.
You might get your work promoted on our show when you do, like Kurt.
Yeah, there you go.
Kurt, did you give your Twitter handle yet?
No.
Do you want to or no?
Sure.
Give it.
It's Kurt.
Hurry up, idiot.
It's Kurt A. Gardinier. That's Kurt, Kurta, Gardinier, Gardinier. And the EQX story is pinned at the top there.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you, Sams.
All right. Back again. Thanks again to Kurt Gardinier. Rap music too spicy for him. Well, it's time, folks. We've reached the end of the SentinelCast, the end of the week. There's really only one thing to do at this point, right, Sam? One thing left to do. Interns, bring in the garbage can. Yep, just bring it in. Be careful.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Watch it.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Watch it. Just, yep, there you go.
All right.
Be careful of that.
All right, and
Did you guys clean it? It's looking a little cleaner. All right, yep, just sit it right there. Right there. Okay, perfect. Right there. Great. Okay,
shall we?
let's do it.
A very Senate Judiciary Committee garbage can,
It is indeed.
if you will. Garbage candidate number 1, Brett Kavanaugh. The guy showed up yesterday to defend himself from allegations he's a belligerent, drunken predator in denial. He did a very poor job, to put it mildly. Kavanaugh ranted, barely coherent at times. He screamed questions back at Democratic senators, at one point asking Amy Klobuchar if she had ever blacked out drinking. The judge lied repeatedly about whether he drinks on weeknights, about his own stated lapses in memory, about what the Devil's Triangle means, about what Leland Kaiser said about himself and Dr. Ford. And when he wasn't lying, Kavanaugh was evading question after question, especially when asked if there should be an FBI investigation involving his dirtbag friend, Mark Judge. During his petulant testimony on Thursday, Kavanaugh whined he might never be able to coach girls basketball again. He shouldn't. He's not fit to walk the streets. This week, we might have to confine him to the garbage can.
Fuck you, Brett Kavanaugh. Garbage candidate number 2, Lindsey Graham. If you thought Brett Kavanaugh's meltdown on Thursday was bad, then you must have missed Lindsey Graham's. Rarely do you see the senator from South Carolina that emotional, unless he's advocating for bombing Iran or something. But Graham felt it was worth it to launch into this bit of political theater to argue why a rich white frat boy is entitled to sit on the Supreme Court just hours after a victim of that frat boy's sexual assault gave powerful, credible testimony directly to Lindsey Graham. You know, there's a theory floating around that Graham was simply auditioning to be Trump's next attorney general. Well, that's even more reason why his ass needs to be locked in a garbage can for a very, very long time.
Garbage candidate number 3, John Cornyn. One of Kavanaugh's biggest boosters on the committee is John Cornyn, and his hot take on Dr. Ford's very credible testimony was to describe it as McCarthyite. Quote, I can't think of a more embarrassing scandal for the Senate since the McCarthy hearings. When the comment about the cruelty of the process toward the people involved in that question was asked, have you no sense of decency? And I am afraid we have lost that, end of quote. Now, you can criticize Democrats for mishandling Dr. Ford's allegations, but she showed up yesterday. She was cooperative. She was eager to help. It would be cruel to her to not take her allegations seriously, take them to their logical conclusion. But Cornyn wants to give a giant fuck you to Dr. Ford and sexual assault victims everywhere. And if that wasn't enough with his McCarthy hearing comment, Cornyn also wants to rub this in the fucking face of anyone who has ever faced professional consequences for being a leftist. Fuck John Cornyn. Fuck his stupid fucking puffy face. He's nominated this week for the garbage can.
Garbage candidate number 4, Jeff Flake. Let's recap Jeff Flake's behavior. He admitted after Kavanaugh testified that he still has a lot of doubt over whether the nominee tried to rape someone in high school, but instead of recognizing that doubt is a pretty good reason to not confirm someone to the most powerful legal post in the country for life, Flake announced Friday morning that he would support the nominee. Not, maybe we should find someone else, but I have doubt, but I'm going to give the belligerent guy the benefit of that doubt. But that's not all for Flake. You see, after getting yelled at in an elevator by sexual assault survivors, Flake pretended he had a change of heart. He said he would demand an FBI investigation into Kavanaugh before a final vote in the full Senate. But until then, Flake voted for Kavanaugh in the committee confirmation vote. Once again, Flake saying so-called courageous things that turn out to be completely irrelevant. Flake will vote yes on Kavanaugh. That's my prediction. His antics today were about giving him more cover to do so because he was sad after getting yelled at in an elevator. But before he does, he'll fool at least 100 more liberals into thinking he's a resistance hero before he ends up voting yes on Kavanaugh. So you're nominated for the garbage can, Jeff.
Garbage candidate number 5, Ted Cruz. Now, Ted Cruz might be the only Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee who's such a piece of shit that he would get nominated this week for something that has nothing to do with Kavanaugh, and you'd be like, why am I not surprised? That's exactly what's going on here. Cruz is nominated for a tweet he sent out on Sunday critical of Beto O'Rourke. The senator highlighted a speech made by his opponent in November saying, quote, in Beto O'Rourke's own words. The problem with this is that the clip of the speech highlighted by Cruz was O'Rourke being fiercely critical of the Dallas police officer who accidentally broke into her black neighbor's apartment and shot him dead. So Cruz is either a dumbass or he's a racist dumbass. That's why he's nominated this week for the garbage can.
And finally, garbage candidate number 6, Chuck Grassley, the ringmaster of this perverse circus, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. None of this could have happened without old Chuck holding the gavel. Grassley's careful orchestration from suppressing testimony that corroborated Dr. Ford's allegations against Kavanaugh, that includes suppressing testimony from other women who alleged to be Kavanaugh's victims. Grassley has denied attempts to get the FBI more involved or subpoena more documents from Kavanaugh's past. He routinely ran cover for Kavanaugh during the hearing, jumping in to save the nominee from tough questions from Democrats. Grassley is the living example of why people over the age of 130 shouldn't be allowed in Congress. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield the rest of my time to the garbage can interns to throw your ass in the garbage can. Okay, we've got Chuck Grassley, we've got Ted Cruz, we've got John Cornyn, we've got Jeff Flake, we've got Lindsey Graham, we've got Brett Kavanaugh. The votes have been counted. Folks, it's probably pretty obvious who's going to get their ass thrown in the garbage can this week. But let's do it anyways. Brett Kavanaugh, you are going in the garbage can. Dunked, dunked, dunked. Stay in there. Stay in there. You're done. You're done. All right. That will do it for the show this week. Thank you so much to our sponsors, the Congressional Dish podcast hosted by Jen Briney. Find it at congressionaldish.com. Another sponsor, levelnews.org. Stay tuned for our newscast every Monday through Thursday at 4:20 p.m. It resumes next week. The SentinelCast is back next Friday. We're here in D.C., so you don't have to be.